This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. President Trump addressing the nation yesterday, shortly after we left the air, and this is what he had to say about the massacre in Las Vegas.
He brutally murdered more than 50 people and wounded hundreds more. It was an act of pure evil.
An act of evil, and we don't have a lot more to go on than that. We're starting to fill in the shooter's life, but not in terms of really identifying a motive. And the closest person to him that has spoken so far, his brother Eric, who kind of gave...
Eric had a lot to say. He came in and out of his house yesterday in Orlando and was just kind of painting a picture of his brother, and just really, they asked him too about mental illness. He said no, and any hate groups. He said no.
Well, he was a little bit of responding to questions, a little bit of stream of consciousness. I mean, I think to be fair to Eric, I think he's almost trying to process it in real time too. Remember, this is just a few hours after he's notified of what his brother had done.
It's like an asteroid fell out of the sky. If an asteroid fell right here, you would feel the exact same way as I feel right now. There's exactly no logic, no reach even for me, where my brother would have done this. There's nothing. It doesn't, I could let you look at the texts. He texts me. There's nothing.
What'd your mom say the last thing?
I gotta go find my wife. So let me go find my wife.
And on two of the operative questions, guns and the girlfriend.
He was divorced with no kids, but he had this girlfriend who's Filipino who he lived with.
Right, and of course, she may be the person who can provide the most insight if there's any insight to be provided. We haven't heard from her yet.
And she's conveniently out of the country.
Well, she's also not even a person of interest anymore. So let's not cast a shadow over her that does not exist according to law enforcement. But Paddock also responded. Eric Paddock also responded to the cache of weapons as well as the girlfriend.
The fact that he had those kind of weapons is just, where the hell did he get automatic weapons? He has no military background or anything like that. When you find out about him, like I said, he's a guy who lived in a house in Mesquite and drove down and gambled in Las Vegas. He did stuff, ate burritos.
Was the woman that they were looking for his girlfriend?
Yes. Yeah, Mary Lou. That's why I was on the phone with the cops. It's because
what do you know about
we were worried that he might have hurt her too.
Police are actually describing her as his wife.
They might have got married, but I don't think they're married. He's just his girlfriend.
He said that he was a wealthy guy, recently won $250,000 gambling recently. According to NBC, Pete Williams, he spent $30,000 a night, $20,000 on gambling.
He was a wealthy guy, and he liked to play video poker. He went on cruises. He sent his mother cookies from, big, huge, crazy boxes of cookies and stuff.
Yeah, like I said, the fact that ISIS claimed responsibility, but sans any corroborating evidence, that's not particularly compelling at this point. So we're really left, at least from my perspective, with no more insight on motive today than we had yesterday. But for more on this professional insight, we're pleased to be joined by Ron Hosko, who's a former FBI Assistant Director, now the President for the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Ron, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's good to be with you again.
So how are you processing the information as is it becoming available, and how should we be processing it?
Well, you mentioned two G's, the girlfriend and the guns, but I think there's a third, and it's the gambling. People do get in way over their head, sometimes with debt in America. For some people, it does drive them to extremes. It certainly, can drive people to depression and thoughts of suicide. And so I think the investigators will be looking very closely at his finances because, as your report notes, nothing else jumps out right now. Certainly not a connection to ISIS. This is not an optimal ISIS target. Usually, by the time we're in our 60s, we've kind of settled into our religion, whatever it might be, and we're probably not going to be inspired by their sort of messaging. But I think the other piece that they have to, and they certainly will be looking hard at, is his finances. The notion of him being a millionaire, well, that can happen. But if you're gambling tens of thousands of dollars a day, you can find yourself deeply in debt. And there were reports of significant gambling in his final few days. And I have the question about whether he was trying to double down on his
chasing
his bets and work his way out, and the shooting was Plan B when he realized he couldn't.
Well, there's the issue too of how he had 23 weapons in that hotel room, and how nobody noticed over the course of 4 days him bringing all that luggage in. Is there any way to scan people's luggage before going into their hotel rooms, or what can we do now? Because I don't want this to be the new normal where people check into hotel rooms or, use their office space in a skyscraper to cut a hole in the window and start shooting at people.
Yeah, the challenge of securing anything, and I think it's, we could put TSA-style lines at hotel rooms across America. It would be prohibitively expensive. It would change the commerce dynamic of hotel rooms. But, it just like when we talk about it with airports, after the shooting in Fort Lauderdale, I think it was late last year, and we've seen it at other airports. When you squeeze that security balloon, the weakness, the limitation manifests itself somewhere else. So you tighten security in place A, and you put a bulge over in place B. And it would have that effect. Look at major theme parks in America at opening time. The park itself may be perfectly secured. The airport beyond the TSA lines may be very neatly secured. The problem is you have hundreds of people queued up, and that becomes the vulnerability. And to a person who is thinking about their opportunity to do great harm, they see that as well. Think about any concert venue. The queues and the mags that are very often used at the queues now are going to protect us generally while we're inside. But look at the hundreds or thousands of people waiting in line for the queue. Well, there's your target.
Well, and that was the Ariana Grande concert too. The shooter was outside the stadium, right? So
bomber.
Sure. Sure. Creates an opportunity, and these are thinking enemies who want to bring us harm. They're looking for those vulnerabilities, and in America, they're easy to find.
What about the response time, the things to do technologically to improve the response time? Now, I'm not criticizing the Vegas police because it was incredible. We played the police scanner audio earlier, and how they zeroed in on this guy as quickly as they did was nothing short of incredible, frankly. So I'm not criticizing, but are there things that could enhance what law enforcement does, like gunshot detectors, sort of what are used in cop-in-a-box technology, where you could have them placed throughout a hotel or an office building so it would make it easier to locate shots fired if and when they're fired?
Yeah, sure. Those gunshot detectors are in place in several major cities in our country, and they can triangulate law enforcement in on what sounds like acoustic signature of gunshots. However, you get back to expense, and to me, your security measures have to be driven by intelligence. And unfortunately, these active shooters, absent signs that point us to the person, of course, at the FBI, the intelligence services, law enforcement are always looking for tidbits of intelligence that will tell them, hey, we need to harden this target. Very often it's because it's an obvious major threat. It's a big sporting event. It's something that the president or the vice president is going to attend. It's the Olympics. And we'll spend weeks or months planning for security around the event. And there's an investment in that. But how do you do that with a concert that's going to draw 20,000 people?
Right.
That's generally not going to draw any federal attention or very minimal federal attention. And the police, sure, they're going to surge some people to it, but do you have the financial wherewithal to spend potentially thousands and thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars putting up gunshot detectors, around events where a shooting never occurs? And at what point does that tail off? We have underfunded police departments across the country in America every day.
Let me.
Where do you get the money from? How do you get that money and then invest it properly with the right result?
Yeah, that's a fair point. Let me ask you about another area of inquiry. His father, who was a convicted bank robber, served a lot of time before he died, and also he was described at some point by law enforcement as psychopathic, and just any history of mental illness in his family.
Right, and I think that's something that the FBI is certainly going to be examining in the days going forward. What was the relationship with the father? Was it a close relationship? Is there a broader family history of mental illness? And I think as we once again, America starts to lurch toward that gun control debate. We ought to have in the same sentence a discussion about mental health in America and the treatment of mental health, because as you know, after abuses that were uncovered during the 60s and 70s, we deinstitutionalized a lot of the mentally ill in America. And right now, their place in our world is in the streets, often untreated and very often filling our jails and our prisons without effective treatment. And so will we see a thread here, or a major piece of this, be related to mental illness? Will we see that emerge? And I think in any gun conversation, because this is a gap in existing background checks, is the lack of information on those who have been involuntarily committed, who do have serious mental health issues that aren't being effectively treated, that are able to get guns. I think that's a concern, as much of a concern as guns, and we ought to be having that conversation too, because it's demanding much police attention. What do we do with our mentally ill? We let the police manage it.
All right.
And they're ill-equipped to do so.
No, it's a fair point, and it's one that we could discuss over and over again in the wake of these massacres. And you're right. He is Ron Hosko, former FBI Assistant Director, President of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Ron, thanks again for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV,